speaker. This is Bobo 103.1, powered by Health Services Authority, committed to caring for you. The views and opinions expressed on Straight Talk with Austin and Ellio do not necessarily reflect or represent the views of Stingray Media, its staff, or contributors. Callers to the program accept full responsibility for the views expressed. The show host and affiliates are not liable for any statements made or any harm claimed. All callers to the program indemnify Straight Talk from all claims. Offensive, defamatory, or unlawful content will not be tolerated. Be a part of the conversation by calling 745-2626. Now, here's Straight Talk with Austin and Ellio on Bobo 103.1.
And hello, K-Man, and welcome to another episode of Straight Talk here on Bobo 103.1 FM. We're your hosts, Austin Harris.
And I'm Ellio Solomon, and yes, welcome to Straight Talk. How are you today, Mr. Harris?
I am very good today, Mr. Solomon. Happy Wednesday to you.
Yeah, this is a legitimate hump day today.
This is a legitimate hump day, and I felt I had the need to remind folks that it's Wednesday, not Tuesday, because I needed an extra reminding. Those long weekends always mess me up.
Messes you up.
So it is Wednesday, folks, for those of you who perhaps needed that extra reminding. 2 more days until the weekend kicks off. And as we stated yesterday, no long weekend this weekend, but there will be another long weekend next weekend. And again, I think it's Discovery Day that we are celebrating next week, Monday the 19th. And since we have fact checkers listening in the listening audience, as we discovered very quickly yesterday, yes, the 19th is Discovery Day, so as to ensure that the information we're sharing is as accurate as we can be.
Wouldn't want to discover that you made an error.
Quite right, indeed. Though theoretically yesterday we didn't make an error. It was certainly a comment that was made, and then it was further expanded on when very clearly we weren't the only ones who were perhaps understood the message differently. You know, when one has to clarify a previous statement, it clearly suggests it wasn't clear in the first place, right?
Right.
So there you have it. The phone lines are open once again on this Wednesday, 745-2626. Likewise, you can also reach out to us on our WhatsApp number, 928-2562. From there, you can either send us a WhatsApp audio note or a traditional WhatsApp text message. Either way, we would share your views, comments, and opinions live on air as part of our ongoing conversation. We are tuning into you today, this Wednesday, not only on your radio dial at 103.1 FM, but also simulcasting live, as usual, over YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find us at our screen name, Straight Talk Radio Show, on all 3 platforms. And we are also continuing to be streamed on the ACT Cruise Tourism Facebook page as well, just for continuity.
Yeah, and I'm here copying links. I can send it out to all of my friends.
There you go. There you go.
Social family here.
That's right. Well, just a quick, by way of update, Parliament continued today. Yesterday, of course, the swearing-in ceremonies took place. And I haven't noted any changes to the previously stated yesterday ministries for various cabinet members. They all seem to be accurate based on the information we received, and they haven't differed by any activities that have taken place within Parliament. But today in Parliament was largely about the selection of members for various House committees. These included, of course, the Public Accounts Committee, which the Honorable Roy McTaggart was once again appointed as the chairman.
Sounds fitting.
There was also the establishment, I think, of 2 new standing select committees. I could be wrong, but I'd never heard of them until today. There was the government motion to appoint the Standing House Committee, which, of course, is a standard committee. There's also a new one, the Standing Select Committee on Privileges, which will comprise of all members of Parliament, and they will address issues relevant to the privileges that are afforded to MPs. I can only assume that, this committee would serve a purpose if perhaps, one of the MPs falls short in terms of the ethics, morality, or otherwise standards clauses. No indication as to whether or not there will be a set standard amongst MPs and or if everybody will follow that. But one of the new standing select committees will be a select committee on privileges. And the other one, also interesting, is a standing select committee to oversee the performance of the ombudsman, amongst other things. Now, I admit there were probably other committees that were appointed today, but truth and fact, I was pulled away from the parliamentary session to do other things, largely, of course, make preparations for our discussion here this evening. So we'll provide updates on the activities of Parliament throughout the course of the week, which, of course, we will continue, again tomorrow. But unlike the Standing Select Committee on Privileges, which, as I stated, will comprise all members of Parliament, and the appointment of a chairman will be determined, I guess, at his next meeting, the Standing Select Committee to oversee the performance of the Ombudsman would comprise 5 members of Parliament. And as I stated, certainly as the week continues, I'll provide updates to the public in terms of who those members are and any other interesting tidbits in terms of the roles of these committees that I think are in the public interest. But I will also point out that, as we discussed yesterday, that Mr. Miller, the Speaker of the House, has ditched both the wig and the ceremonial robe and frocks and stuff that they wear. He was just in a suit today, no robe, but a suit and tie, so free of any encumbrances, as they would say.
Encumbrances, yeah. Well, we'll see if it's a temporary thing or a permanent.
Yes, we certainly will.
But we won't be totally surprised if it's permanent.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised at all. And again, given the brief difficulty, I wonder if that was part of the reason why his acceptance speech was so short, were the challenges, like I said yesterday, of keeping the hair out of the side of his mouth. But obviously, Mr. Miller, not quite used to having long hair, he is. So he was dealing with some of the challenges associated with that yesterday.
Oh, the difficulties of the job.
That's right. Which, by the way, I'm so glad you have your hair pulled back today. Yesterday, I was kind of falling in your eyes.
Oh, mine?
Yeah, yours.
Really? Okay, how in the hell did that happen? I never.
Yeah, neither one of us have any experience.
I never had that blessing nor that curse, depending on how you want to look at it.
No, I think certainly it would be a curse.
Mine is kind of, you comb it stays in place. No spray needed.
Get out of the shower, give it a quick shake. You're ready for the day.
Referred to as tall and not long.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. But it's not even tall anymore. Whilst you may have had tall hair once upon a time, those days are behind us. Well, behind you.
Yeah, we do our best to try to keep it trim. I always get upset, though, if you cut your hair and then you didn't tell me you were going to cut it.
I know. I learned that lesson from the last time you mentioned it, so I decided for certain...
You won't error again.
I will not make that mistake again.
Perfect.
Going forward, I will definitely let you know in advance, hey, today's haircut day. I don't know what you got planned, but maybe you want to do it.
Just so you know, that was a common thing between my brothers and I.
Yeah?
Well, first of all, I have 4 brothers, right?
Yes.
So if sometimes people confuse us. But we would always say that, hey, you cut your hair, you didn't check your brother. Like a little bit of, hey, how you cut your hair, you didn't check your brother.
Right. We got to look like each other all the way across the board. So, and that makes sense.
Well, it's a complete cover-up, I can assure you. Which brother was that? I don't know.
Who knows?
They all look alike.
Who knows? Yesterday, we obviously congratulated the incoming new Miss Earth, Cayman Islands, I think it is. And we promised that we would have an opportunity to have her on the program. Well, for those of you who are tuned in and are interested in this newest queen for the Cayman Islands, we will have the pleasure of hosting the new Miss Earth Cayman Islands in our studios on Friday. I believe the time will be at 5 o'clock, but certainly I will provide further updates as we get further into the week, obviously with tomorrow again, being Thursday. See, already I'm thinking I got 2 more days left in the week, when in reality, well, I do have 2 more days, but not 2 more days till Friday. So we'll provide a much clearer update in terms of the time tomorrow But I do believe tentatively we will have Miss Earth as our guest on Friday at 5 o'clock. We're just waiting.
This is correct.
On her final confirmation, certainly based on her otherwise, as the English say, busy schedule.
Schedule indeed.
Schedule. I can't get used to that. Though it is a nice word, schedule. I still have to say schedule in my American parlance.
Mm-hmm.
So that is that. Ellio and I were thinking today that, obviously we would spend some time looking at the makeup of the current administration, which, as we stated yesterday, now has a new name. The National Coalition for Caymanians is their new name, and that honors, of course, the makeup of all three teams in the making, the TCCP, the CINP, and the Independents, joining together, if you will, of their names and, of course, their desired goals and aspirations. And whilst we may have to wait until the strategic policy statement is presented in Parliament by the new coalition to determine really what will be the synergies, what sort of parallels they may find agreement on in relation to, obviously, their tripartite makeup of members. We have at least 5 different manifestos that they have to find the time to combine. And certainly one can expect that those meetings, following today's parliamentary meeting, of course, will be taking place as they work towards the development of their strategic policy statement, which will outline the goals and ambitions of the coalition government over the next 4 years. But whilst we wait on that, we thought it might be appropriate. In fact, my colleague thought it might be appropriate, let's admit it, that we take a look at their manifestos, or as many as we can get our hands on, and see what sort of parallels or synergies may exist that might help to provide some indication as to what the strategic goals and or priorities of the new coalition government will be. I'm happy to report that we were able to get a hold of the manifestos for the 2 large parties, TCCP and the CINP.
Right.
Still have my feelers out for manifestos for the 3 independents who were elected, but hopefully we will have that need satisfied, hopefully by tomorrow, and give us the opportunity over the course of this week to, again, examine those manifestos, see what similarities may exist, and then perhaps provide some degree of a working roadmap as to what we think the National Strategic Policy Statement will look like.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a very good exercise, because as you put them all together, like you're saying, is that you're going to be able to see where there's those synergies and, again, where those differences exist. And that will be able to help us know where they're going to have some challenges, perhaps even within their own group.
Yes.
And it definitely allows us, which I think amongst other things as the talk show that we are, in order to be able to look and make sure on behalf of the public that we can hold them accountable for the things that they have promised as well.
Absolutely.
So it's a good exercise, and we'll definitely keep you involved as the listening public.
Mm-hmm. Well, that will be our plan. And again, we hope to do a decent job of it together. But as always, we encourage members of the public to be a part of those conversations by calling in, dialing 745-2626, or as always, utilizing our WhatsApp number for those purposes. Interestingly enough, before we get to that, though, we see that, and this is just based on an article that appeared in our least favorite CNS, but it provides some insight into how the National Coalition for Caymanians was formed, and perhaps giving us some indication as to the conversations that were taking place both during the elections that led to the teamwork that very clearly was defined after the elections and the so-called horse trading. As we mentioned yesterday, what was definitely evident in the election campaign was that of the 4 groups, 3 of those groups were targeting the PPM as their ultimate opponent. Nobody seemed to have any alignment with the PPM, save, of course, Mr. Saunders. But even Mr. Saunders was a bit tight-lipped in terms of, his announcements, in terms of who he would work with. I think he may have made one, possibly two statements in that regard in the public domain, but largely remained silent on that point throughout the campaign trail, whereas all three of the other groups certainly didn't make any secret that, who they thought they were there to provide perhaps a different approach to. And I suppose quite rightly so, because the PPM held on to power, I think, through three administrations, not three consecutive, but certainly two consecutive administrations, and the third prior to that. So I suppose in their mind, they were viewing their opponent would be to present a different case than the PPM. But apparently Mr. Ralston Anglin, in a meeting that was held, and I'm looking for the date in the article, but I believe it occurred over the weekend. But basically he said that the independent candidates realized from very early on that they could very well be the tiebreakers in any formation of any government. They, too, didn't expect any of the dominant parties to win by a landslide or win all of their seats, but they certainly recognized an opportunity that would be placed in their hands in choosing the formation of the next administration. And given the activities of 2021, particularly with Isaac Rankin and J.E. Banks, both of whom were previously in agreement to work with the PPM, but for whatever reason reneged on those plans. They assumed that those individuals would not be working with the PPM going forward. Certainly Mr. Anglin had his own views. So the three of them really got together in thinking and thought, well, let's be able to extend an olive branch to at least the two other existing parties, TCCP and CINP, which, according again to the article, actually began earlier on in the campaign. So those discussions were already underway. Those relationships were already established, and therefore it should come as no surprise that once the elections were over, that horse trading process was greatly reduced, obviously benefiting from those previous conversations where synergies were already identified in advance that would certainly assist them in achieving agreement, if you will, following the elections. And that was really so said, so done. Following the election, those previous conversations did, in fact, yield fruit. And we have an association between the tripartite groups, CNP, TCCP, and the independents. So
and
putting to rest any rumors that may have already been circulating anyway.
Right. I mean, I heard that the CINP and the TCCP had already met, at least had one meeting, sort of a formal meeting.
Yes.
That's what I heard.
Yes.
And so I'm not surprised in terms of them getting in and being able to, as you've said, be able to achieve that synergy rather quickly. And again, there's arguably nothing wrong with that. People anticipating that they're going to win, who they're willing to work with, who they're not. And I think it also identified that when it came to the debates, it seemed as if two of them were already there. I don't want to say ganging up on him, on the PPM, but they definitely seem to have only been targeting the PPM as well. So persons could draw inferences from that as well.
Yes.
But interesting.
Interesting indeed. And just one other interesting factoid. I don't know if you saw this headline, but there was an article in the Cayman Compass where the now unseated father of the House, the Honorable McKeeva Bush, set sights on a new opponent, that being single-member constituencies. In an article published in the Cayman Compass, it starts out saying, after losing an election for the first time in 40 years, McKeeva Bush said on Thursday that he was in a state of reluctant relief. Although he won't have a seat in Parliament for the first time since 1984, Bush says he still has another political foe to fight, and that is single-member constituencies, which he defined as being the worst thing that has ever happened to this country, stating that it is not healthy for a small island democracy, something that, well, you clearly have stated your agreement on in that same position. So I thought I'd highlight that you and your former colleague, McKeeva Bush,
Are you saying he
to be
agrees with
aligned.
me, or I'm agreeing with him?
Well, since you said it first, I would say he's agreeing with you in this regard.
You know, the thing is, I think if you go back, I mean, our group at the time basically were not supportive of single-member constituencies. But yeah, I don't really think it's good for the country. I think it's caused a lot of undue division and again, the amplification of some minority voices, which unfortunately I don't view as the best thing for the country.
Mm-hmm.
I think from then, no, I can tell you this one I was all alone on at the time was the whole issue of national vote. I didn't really have much support from that, and there was later on during our tenure that Mr. Anglin had joined chorus with me on the national vote, but didn't have much support then. But I think the public perhaps sees it a little bit different now that national vote of some form or another is probably going to be much more constructive for Cape Man. After all, from everything I remember about politics, it was trying to avoid being opposition for opposition's sake. It was arguments that we didn't want division and wanted a bit more unity. And what we've got is a little bit more division with 19 pieces. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's proper. I don't think it's the best for the country.
Yes. Well,
so he definitely right about that one.
Well, we shall see whether or not he and others, presumably yourself, can make the case sufficient enough in which to encourage the larger populace to perhaps debate this issue over the course of the next 4 years, and maybe even encourage the government to either bring a motion to introduce a change, or God help us, perhaps yet again another referendum.
Oh, Lord.
Which we know how much we love those things.
Yeah. In this particular case, it probably, it would be good to see if some government does it. But considering that persons would have gained their seat under this particular model, it offers a challenge that no one's really going to want to change it. Even though I can say that we had a Chamber of Commerce discussion some months ago, in which at that point in time, the Deputy Premier at the time, the Honorable Kenneth Bryan, actually stated that he didn't support the single-member constituents, that he thought it should be changed.
Yeah.
And that was a very interesting statement when I heard him say that, because, again, as we can see, he's done very well in it. You know, he's gained his seat in it, and he continues to be able to be very strong in his area. So that touched me in many different ways, because that adds, I think, a lot more credibility to the fact that this is not just something that, let's change it because I'm not benefiting from it. It adds a lot of validity to the discussion. It was good to hear him say that.
Yes. Well, in the article, which was published on last week, Thursday, the 1st of May, it provided a brief history on the single-member constituency. And with 3 minutes remaining, I think I have enough to share it with the listening audience. It says, in 2012, a petition was circulated to force a people-initiated referendum on adopting single-member constituencies in hopes to have it in force before the 2013 general election. As the petition crossed 3,000 signatures of the approximately 3,800 needed to force the people-initiated referendum, Bush and his then administration, the UDP, called a government-initiated referendum on single-member constituencies in July 2012. Held outside of the general election, the referendum attracted only 57% of the electorate, and while the majorities of those who voted did so in favor of single-member constituencies, the number represented only 37% of the total electorate. As a result, the UDP refused to initiate the change in the 2013 general election. However, after that, the People's Progressive Movement won that election, and having campaigned on a platform that included adopting single-member constituencies, it announced that it would implement the change for the 2017 elections. What has happened since that time in a series of coalition governments that have not been able to get through 4 years without upheavals. The 2025 election was expected to be no different. Bush says it's time for a change from single-member constituencies. He went on to say, I was against it from the start, and I'm still against it, adding that the coalition governments can't get anything done. Well, again, I won't say I agree with that last statement. I felt that certainly the 17 to 21 administration, which I was a part of, got a lot of things done. And again, I think the record will stand on that merit. As for the administration just passed, well, again, I wouldn't disagree with him. They nothing was achieved.
But
Largely,
your situation was slightly different. Didn't you all have, a significant majority, though?
oh, well,
Even though you needed a couple of persons with you,
yes.
you had pretty good sized numbers.
Well, we had pretty good size number. The PPM, obviously, that's why they like to call it at every opportunity as the PPM-led coalition.
Right.
And obviously, the leadership positions largely remain unchanged from the previous administration, in which obviously they stood at the helm. I think they were, again, either two or a maximum of three independents that also, kind of like the current administration, joined over to make up that coalition. But the majority of members, yes, to your point, were already PPM, with the rest of us, or
So, if you
few of us working to work with them.
Right. If you even just look at that from a political perspective, now granted you'd want more data, but even then you could see that initially, the moment you introduced it, you had somewhat of a large section or block of parliamentarians, and it's only continued to get looser and looser after that.
That's right.
Entropy has entered the system.
Yes.
Because, right now you have a group, and we're wishing them the best, but you can see that's divided clearly into three sections.
Yes.
We have two sections of 33%, and then the other one's fragmented even more, considering that it's independence.
That's right.
And again, I think all the more reason why we want to be able to look at the documents that they've all produced and see where those synergies are, echo it, make the public aware of it, and then especially showing where the differences are, so we can get a pretty good idea of some of what their challenges are going to be.
Well, we're going to go there when Straight Talk returns.
Bobo. The BBC is the world's most trusted news source. And Bobo 103.1 is where you'll find the BBC World Service.
BBC News, the world news from the BBC.
And the home of Cayman's most listened to talk shows.
That's right, folks. Everyone is telling their mama about the cold hard truth.
And welcome to Straight Talk. I'm your host, Austin Harris.
And I'm Ellio Solomon.
Across Cayman, on FM, online, and on your smart speaker. This is Bobo 103.1.
The BBC's From Our Own Correspondent.
In today's Russia, no one is allowed anywhere near the political stage if they pose a serious challenge to Vladimir Putin.
Stories and reflections from our reporters around the world.
There is a major sense of insecurity here. More people are coming in from Sudan every day.
From Our Own Correspondent from the BBC.
The home of the BBC World Service. This is Bobo FM.
How can we understand the world better?
The BBC World Service is a window onto the wider world.
A vantage point from which to survey a new horizon.
News, reports, and analysis from around the world.
Stories we think matter.
Different people from different societies.
We get to the heart of global issues.
News, stories, and global perspectives from the BBC World Service.
The home of the BBC World Service. This is Bobo FM. This is Bobo 103.1, powered by Health Services Authority. At Health Services Authority, they are committed to caring for you. They are Cayman's largest and longest-standing healthcare provider, offering the most comprehensive range of inpatient, outpatient, and public health services at 9 different locations across all 3 islands. Across Cayman on 103.1 FM, online, and on your smart speaker. The home of the BBC World Service. This is Bobo 103.1.
BBC News with Sue Montgomery. Thick black smoke has risen from the Sistine Chapel chimney, signalling that the cardinals meeting in the conclave have not yet agreed on a new pope. Some in the crowd clapped impatiently, hoping for news. The final decision could take several days. From the Vatican, here's our correspondent, Mariam Moshiri.
After the first vote of the conclave tonight, no pope has been elected. We saw earlier black smoke billowing out of that chimney on top of the Sistine Chapel. It was a long wait, though, for those tens of thousands of people who had come to St. Peter's Square to watch that chimney, and for us watching it here on BBC News. The process by which the new pope is elected continues tomorrow morning.
Russian state media say a 3-day unilateral ceasefire proposed by Moscow in its war in Ukraine has come into force. Ukraine has scorned the truce, but President Zelensky repeated on Wednesday night that Kyiv was ready to observe a longer 30-day ceasefire. The US Central Bank has left interest rates unchanged for the third time in a row, warning that inflation and unemployment could rise. The head of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, has been coming under pressure from President Trump to lower borrowing costs. But he insisted that repeated criticism didn't affect the way the bank made its decisions. The BBC's Erin Delmore reports.
The Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell pointed to four main areas where substantial changes to federal policy threaten to shake up the U.S. economy: trade, fiscal policy, immigration, and regulation. Mr. Powell conceded that the tariffs unveiled by President Trump had been larger than anticipated, but he said that they were still evolving, and therefore the effect on the economy was uncertain. He also said that the economy was in solid shape, and the Fed was well positioned to leave interest rates unchanged, watch the incoming data, and await further clarity. This means consumers could see a higher chance of stagflation or persistent elevated prices.
Pakistan has condemned India's missile strikes in its territory as acts of war and said it reserved the right to respond. Pakistan's military says the number of civilians killed in the strikes has risen to 31. Speaking to the BBC, the cabinet minister, Ahsan Iqbal, said it was civilians, not militants, who were killed.
Who are the casualties? How can be a 7-year-old boy a terrorist? How can be a 5-year-old girl be a terrorist? How can be a housewife women, they can be terrorists? So I think India is just trying to give wrong information to the international community in order to cover its very cowardly act.
India said its missile strikes had destroyed 9 terrorist camps in Pakistan in response to a deadly attack on Indian tourists in Kashmir 2 weeks ago. BBC News. A jury in the United States has cleared 3 former police officers of second-degree murder and other charges relating to the death of a young black man, Tyree Nichols, in 2023. There was national outrage after body cam footage showed the officers, who were all black, beating the 29-year-old during a traffic stop in the city of Memphis. He died 3 days later from his injuries. The Palestinian Health Ministry says 2 almost simultaneous Israeli airstrikes in Gaza City have killed at least 33 people. One hit a restaurant which had been operating as a community kitchen. Video footage showed bodies slumped at tables. A vendor was killed in his chair in the other strike that hit a marketplace 100 metres away. A small child with a rucksack is seen lying dead in the street. Germany's new Conservative-led government has ordered more border checks to reduce the number of migrants entering the country. The Interior Minister, Alexander Dobrindt, said this would reduce illegal migration, but also the number of people applying for asylum. He said police would be able to turn away some asylum seekers. Mr. Dobrindt was speaking to reporters in Berlin.
We will gradually increase the higher number of rejections and the stronger controls at the borders. We will ensure that step by step more police forces are deployed at the borders and can also carry out these refoulements.
Migration was one of the dominant themes of February's election. Football, and the French side Paris Saint-Germain are through to the UEFA Champions League final after beating Arsenal 3-1 on aggregate, with Wednesday night semi-final in Paris ending 2-1. PSG will take on the Italian team Inter Milan. The final will take place in Munich on the 31st of May. BBC News.
Opinions expressed on Straight Talk with Austin and Ellio do not necessarily reflect or represent the views of Stingray Media, its staff, or contributors. Callers to the program accept full responsibility for the views expressed. The show host and affiliates are not liable for any statements made or any harm claimed. All callers to the program indemnify Straight Talk from all claims. Offensive, defamatory, or unlawful content will not be tolerated. Be a part of the conversation by calling 745-2626. Now, here's Straight Talk with Austin and Ellio on Bobo 103.1.
And welcome back, man, to more Straight Talk, brought to you by Bobo 103.1 FM and simulcasting live on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. We're your host, Ellio Solomon, myself, Austin Harris, and the phone lines are open. 745-2626 is the number if you want to call in and lend your voice to our ongoing conversation, or if calling isn't your thing, well, by all means, you can certainly take advantage of our WhatsApp number, by dialing 928-2562, and from there either leaving us a WhatsApp audio note or a traditional WhatsApp text message. Are we keeping you awake over there, Sunshine?
It's challenging, but I'm surviving, Austin. I appreciate your concerns.
Well, I would suggest maybe moving away from the hot cocoa and grabbing a little caffeine.
Well,
but then again, caffeine at this late hour might
I won't sleep tonight.
No, exactly. It might impede your attempts to fall asleep.
That's
tonight,
precisely what I need.
That's right.
It's all. I'll just tell you. In the spirit of transparency, it's just. I think it's all like you ever know you're working, and you're perfectly energized, and as soon as you know that your mind has come to the realization that you'll be taking 2 weeks vacation.
Yes.
You could just feel your body shutting down.
Yes.
So that's kind of what happened to me. 7 months of, campaigning on and on, nonstop. And now it's done. And I'm like,
yeah,
I just want to rest.
You get caught up on it. I would have thought you would have, seized that opportunity over the long weekend.
To do what?
4 days.
I'm not having enough. My body's like, give me some more.
All right. Like I said, if this weekend's not going to be enough, you'll have one more
long weekend.
Apple the following weekend. And hopefully by then you'll be ready and energized and ready to move forward. As we discussed during the first half hour, our plan here today and certainly over the course of this week, today, tomorrow, maybe Friday, will be an examination of the various manifestos. There are at least 5 that make up the current National Coalition for Caymanians. And we'll be looking for areas of synergies or parallels, similarities, if you will, and how the national strategic policy might be worded or formed once the government has obviously made that determination. Those meetings likely to continue over the course of the next few weeks leading up to that national policy statement by the government. But in the meantime, we're going to take a look at the manifestos that we've managed to get our hands on and seeking to see what similarities exist in those manifestos and what could form part of the combined coalition priorities, now bringing those 3 groups together as one. And there are 2 areas most specifically where I think were featured largely on the campaign trail, though the proposed plans to address them or how to achieve them in some cases mirrored each other. In other cases were staunchly and distinctly opposing each other. They both agreed there were problems, but they had very different ways in which of achieving them. We're going to touch on some of those today. But immigration and cost of living, immigration by way of immigration reform, in terms of employment, fairer landscape specifically for Caymanians were views shared by both parties, and likewise cost of living were also highlighted. Undoubtedly, these issues were formed on their manifesto based on their door-to-door canvassing, because these were the top 2 priorities, at least on the minds of voters heading into the 2025 general election. As stated earlier, we were successful in receiving copies of the Caymanian Community Party Manifesto, as well as the Cayman Islands National Party Manifesto. Thankfully, the CINP Manifesto was available online, so that was easier to get a hold of. But we did get a hold of a copy of the TCCP Manifesto, some 44 pages. It consisted in totality. But I was also informed that whilst that manifesto was rather comprehensive, there would have been some changes made to it, although those changes never were formalized prior to the elections. And I'm trying to determine whether or not those meetings to make those changes actually took place and or what the result was. But specifically, they relate to their subcommittee that deals with young people in particular. Okay. And it sought to take in the views of young persons and then try to marry those views in the larger manifesto or substantive manifesto to form their way forward. The one person that I spoke to from within that party or group, if you will, suggested that there were opportunities for assimilation of views, and that there could have been changes made to the TCCP manifesto. But as we sit here today, there have been no changes as I've been aware of, but certainly
we're taking it as it is.
We take it as it is, but certainly those may change, and as they change and as that information is made available to us, we certainly will do our part to make those things available to you.
Well, it's going to be a lot of discussion. I want to assure the public it's going to be a lot of things to discuss. I mean, I remember reading. I just had access to the TCCP document, and again, you know, there's talk in there, for example, about how Caymanians feel, multi-generational, and again, you wanting to hold on to their culture and heritage. And I looked at things, for example, like food.
Yes.
One of the things that mentioned in there is the issue of seeming to want to remove the duties on healthy stuff. And, you know, I like the idea because, you know, unfortunately, you've got a lot of healthy food that the price is too high.
Uh-huh.
And then the junk food is cheaper. So, well, that's not creating a very healthy society. But you can see where all these things are going to lead for some good discussion, because the challenges are going to be, if you're going to lose the revenues that you're getting on the duties there, but we already start in a deficit position, and potentially other sources of revenue might disappear as well. It's going to be challenging to see how all of these things, if it can be actually implemented.
Indeed. Well, certainly, since you started with food security, let's
go there.
Let's start there. Whilst the approaches of both the TCCP and the CINP differed as it relates to food security, there were areas of some alignment. The TCCP, for example, believed that, you know, they need to reduce our weekly grocery bills. We need to attack it on multiple fronts. The first front, as you pointed out, was to expand the list of foods eligible for zero duty, and these include adding to that list healthy and or organic foods. Certainly, this was a viewpoint shared by the CINP, where they believed in keeping essential food affordable by lowering duties on staple food items. Now, again, the difference here is perhaps
between zero and lower.
It's zero and lower, exactly, as well as the healthy and organic foods category. The TCCP thought to add those items to the zero duty category, perhaps to promote greater wellness, whereas the CINP took on board the more staples, the flour and the eggs and the milk and whatnot that make up, you know, the standard basic ingredients, and making those even more duty-free, and perhaps even expanding that list. The TCCP encouraged greater community cooperatives to engage in bulk buying to lower food costs in families and individuals. I think the similarity in that was where the CINP proposed building strategic food reserves. So on the one hand, you want to stockpile food that perhaps grocery stores regularly use, but have them available to benefit the country against the backdrop of whether it be price shocks or shortages in availability, to protect us or give the country a degree of buffering room, which I thought aligned to an extent with the TCCP plan of engaging in bulk buying to lower food costs as well. So, greater volume, whilst they may not be on the shelves but stored off-site, may reduce the cost.
Who's going to do that buying? What buying? What stock buying?
Well, encouraging the community cooperatives is what the TCCP is saying. So government wouldn't be doing the buying, but either Foster's or the various supermarkets, inclusive of maybe the food bank. But both sides want to increase the volume of food. One calls it, what do they call it? Food reserves, and the other calls it increasing food volumes to bring prices down. So I think those two areas align them. Like I said, their approaches differ, but I think their underlying viewpoint on the need to bring in more to either buffer against shortages or buffer against rising prices seem to be aligned. And also, both were very supportive of community farming and facilitating backyard farming.
Right.
The CINP suggested growing more food locally. The TCCP suggested community farming, backyard farming, and they took it a step further by dedicating land parcels for the purposes of growing food. So, again, I think these three areas show alignment on the food security aspect and may find themselves featuring on their wider national strategic policy. Because certainly, again, as you pointed out, there were differences in the 2017 to 2021 government administration, which I was a part of, versus the tripartite relationship that exists in now 2025. But there was still that same obligation to marry the manifestos of those members who in 2017 were not part of the PPM, and how to, include my manifesto, my objectives, that of Mr. Dwayne Seymour, for example, and his objectives into the overall strategic policy. That was a simpler exercise just in terms of the fewer outside members, if you want to call it that, than what the current national coalition is going to face. But the similarities would be in the approach, and our approach was simple this: what is it that we agree on, or what is it that we share commonality on, and let's focus on those first.
Right.
And then, of course, the things that perhaps we either differ on or differ in how we get there, we, attack that second and last.
Yeah.
So I presume that it would be, in my mind, the most efficient way,
similar strategy,
to approach this for the national coalition, and I can't see them choosing any other.
Well, speaking about food, I noted on the TCCP manifesto, and you don't mind if I just say CCP. I mean, I think everyone knows it's not the Communist Party.
Yes.
But that T is just getting
it just gets in the way.
Yeah, it's getting in my way.
Yeah.
I think looking at CCP manifesto, I believe that one of the things they mentioned was, again, the idea that echoed from 2017, and other administrations have started in that direction, but again, getting food from lowering food costs, again, by looking at our neighbors in terms of importing directly from them. But one of the things I noted is that they had a couple of countries. I think they had Jamaica, they had Dominica, et cetera, but they didn't see Honduras. Now, I don't know if that was just a intentional move, but I noted it wasn't there.
Yeah.
And I'm searching now to find the section because I read through it earlier. But,
I have it here. They have importing from regions and jurisdictions such as Jamaica, Belize, Panama, the Dominican Republic, and Mexico were the recommendations that CCP put forward.
Right, and I'm just curious on that. Just that's a pet one, I suppose, is why Honduras isn't there. But either way, I think the concept, assuming it can actually happen, because that's the challenge, right? I mean, we talk about it, but if it can actually happen, I think it is good to be able to look and say, let's go direct to some of the sources and get the food.
Right.
I mean, a lot of the stuff, for example, from Honduras is just going straight to America. We buy it from America. Why can't we do some of that directly?
Well, I think it's a legitimate argument to make, but there's also an equally important reality.
Sure.
The same companies that provide our produce here in the Cayman Islands are already buying from these jurisdictions. The Doles of the world or whatnot are presumably already in the Dominican Republic and Mexico. Albeit they're buying there in bulk, shipping to the U.S. and then back to us. I'm not sure, because this was an area that was discussed under previous administrations, and I think the only reason why it hasn't, developed into a working arrangement is because largely these relationships already exist with the food suppliers that we buy from anyway. Though it would be an interesting exercise to see how the cost differences work out, because obviously you cut out the middleman when you don't have to ship to the U.S. to come back to the Cayman Islands, but perhaps keep it within the region. I think that might be interesting. But I believe also because these relationships with those who are providing us food supplies are already in these jurisdictions, that the price differences may be nominal. But again, I don't know this for fact, but I only use the fact that it hasn't materialized into working idea to perhaps suggest that, yes, it's a good idea, but we're already doing that, so to speak, in our current arrangements.
Yeah, well, I mean, from my understanding is it would be a case where we're kind of buying secondhand, again, because you would have companies in this particular case in the United States purchasing whether from themselves or otherwise, pulling that product, let's say, out of Honduras, and then ends up in the United States. And as a result of that, additional cost is tagged in it when we purchase it. Whereas if we went directly to the suppliers, we get that a lot cheaper. And I really think it can go further when it comes to farming and stuff. I like the idea as well about, you know, being able to free up some of the land here and allow it to be used for farming locally. I think that's great. But not to pick on anyone, but you've seen the even the amount of money that we've seen being spent, let's just say in schools, $53 million. You know, I think you have the real opportunity, and not to knock that purchase or construction, but just to say, if we can do that, you could see that there's nothing that precludes you from being able to even purchase land in some of these countries, or in some instances, actual businesses, farms. You know, I remember seeing there was one for sale in Honduras with thousands of heads of cattle. You know, that could technically be Cayman Islands property, and nothing prevents you from purchasing it, owning it, providing work opportunities, as well as being able to ship a lot of those products right back here to Cayman and to use CCP's line at zero, arguably zero, or CINP, much lower duties, and therefore reducing the cost of living, expanding the territory. You create redundancies because, again, if you have a hurricane here and somehow your farming is seriously damaged here, you've got something else. You've got something else in another country, and vice versa.
Right.
So there's lots of opportunities, and I would love to see the government, take the bull by the horns, no pun intended, take the bull by the horns and actually make it happen. Because I really believe it is workable, but I think we just need a group, a government that's really committed to make it happen.
Well, I think they will see, the greatest yields in developing the opportunity of growing more food locally. Again, whilst we were still on the radio, for example, we had an opportunity to see firsthand the acres upon acres upon acres of arable agricultural land that is largely going unused in this country that could be utilized for farming opportunities. The Cayman Islands National Party took it a step further in their recommendations by, one recommendation, creating a food innovation hub to research better ways to grow food in our tropical climate, to promote and support hydroponics, aquaponics, container farming, vertical farms. So you're not taking, obviously, horizontal land, but you're going up. So, building vertically, which I think is interesting, encouraging public institutions, schools, and whatnot to establish their own grow gardens, if you will. Again, that can lend itself to feeding the school individually, but certainly I think the grow local is an opportunity of untapped potential that would yield this country the greatest value. And I think these specific plans by the CNP, combined with the CCP plan to set aside specific land parcels to further add to the acreage for agriculture, presents that kind of opportunity that we could access to. And obviously that cuts out the whole need to travel at all. And, just simply it's transportation costs at that point in time.
Well,
but it does factor in the high labor cost that would still exist in Cayman that doesn't exist in some of these other jurisdictions.
Yeah, there are some challenges, and I want to address that. But just before I do that, I mean, we had the pleasure of having Mr. Gary Lawrence here on the program that was talking about his farming initiative.
Yes.
So, I would encourage persons like him to make sure and talk to this government, and let's see if they're going to give him some support, because it seems to be aligned with what they're saying. So hopefully he'll be able to reach out to them and get the support that he really wants and needs.
Well, he seemed to have an alignment with the National Party throughout the election. So hopefully, presumably, these conversations are already taking place. And
hopefully something happens.
As I look at some of their recommendations, perhaps I could say to myself, I see, pockets of Kerry Lawrence ideas in some of these recommendations. So it suggests to me that perhaps those synergies have already been developed. But again, I think if we can embrace agriculture in this country, which at one time it used to be a big part of our economy, but again, I guess with our success or otherwise, we became victims of our own success and we dropped agriculture and picked up tourism and finance.
Yeah, well, somehow we don't have to feed ourselves, apparently. But, just when we come back from the break, I mean, I think the ideas like how the Carrie Lawrence have in terms of being able to grow, in these containers and growing vertically, that offers to me, I think, a tremendous amount of future. But I can tell you, the farmland and stuff here, it is a difficulty, it's a challenge, it's not easy. And then, of course, like you've rightly mentioned, whether it's the labor cost of the individuals or transportation. So you really want to be able to do it in a way where at the end of the day, yeah, you have some farming going on here at the minimum for redundancy purposes, but I think it's something that you should also explore going somewhere else where you can actually get that same redundancy, but at the same time at a much better cost.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of arable land around here. At least if it is, somebody please point me to it.
That's right.
You got to contend with some serious rocks out there.
Well, I mean, your farm is in East End. Yeah. There's Winterland in East End, just off of Breakers, if you will, and that's hundreds of acres. Behind it, there were farms that used to be run by the Kirkconnells. Again, all of these acreages could represent potential opportunities, but right now the only thing they're growing on them are weeds. There's also the access to Cayman's water table, which again is in the Eastern District. I'm not saying it's everywhere, but these areas have already been identified. And again, I like the specific direction of the CNP. One of them, what they call the 20 by 2040 plan, which would be to grow 20% of Cayman's nutritional needs by 2040. I like that kind of specific plan as opposed to generalizations, which we see clearly laid out by the National Party. It is 28 minutes past the hour of 5 o'clock, and we do need to pause. But our goal here, for those of you just tuning in, is we're examining the similarities, synergies, and or parallels between some of the manifestos of the winning team to see what the strategy going forward might look like. Keep it locked. We'll be back.
More Straight Talk with Austin and Ellio coming up. Be a part of the conversation by calling 745-2626. Bobo 103.1.
World Parrot Day is May 31st, and Cayman's parrots need your help. Keep their habitats safe by protecting large native trees that provide food, shelter, and nesting space. Plant native trees to support parrots and other local wildlife for generations to come. Want to do more? Support conservation and learn how to care for parrots by picking up the Parrot Husbandry Manual by Geddes Hislop. Available now at the Cayman Turtle Center.
Stingray Media encourages you to keep safe on our roads. Always use your indicators to signal an intended change of direction, whether turning left or right, or when moving out of your traffic lane. Using indicators is the universal language for drivers to notify other road users of their intentions. Failing to indicate is an offense according to the traffic law and carries a penalty of $100 CI. Supported by ICWI, Cayman Islands Insurance Association, CG Britcay, and National Road Safety, the road to zero.
With you in mind, we have your style. Find what you need down every aisle. You want saving, selection, and quality. That's why we're your home store. Home store. The way to make a home. The way to make a home.
The Office Hero. To claim this title, you have to make an exceedingly wise decision. Do something that benefits staff, impresses clients, all while keeping expenses low. Are you ready to be the Office Hero? Here's what to do. Call Hughes Cleaning Service. Hughes Cleaning Service will make your office shine and you a hero. Dusting, vacuuming, windows, sanitizing, and more. Hughes expert cleaners will make your office a healthy, immaculate, impressive workspace. Call 949-0734. Visit hughes-janitorial.com. Hughes, you get more than clean.
Have your engine driving like never before with Pure 93, the highest pure octane fuel in Cayman, and available exclusively at Rubis service stations. Pure 93 protects against engine knock, restores lost power and acceleration, cleans fuel injectors, intake valves, removes engine deposits, improves your fuel economy, and it meets international specification requirements for your car. Fill up with Pure 93 now and keep your engine running like new. Fuel the difference with Pure 93, available exclusively at Rubis.
At Priced Right, spending less on everyday products is easy.
Spend less on office supplies, tools, and automotive products.
Spend less on groceries, fresh produce, and meat.
Spend less on electronics, TVs, and speakers.
Spend less on home furnishings, beauty products, and apparel.
At Priced Right, we believe you can live better for less.
To start saving, visit us at the Airport Center in Georgetown or at Republic's Plaza in West Bay.
For more info, visit pricedright.ky. Live better for less at Priced Right.
Across Cayman on FM, online, and on your smart speaker. This is Bobo 103.1, powered by Health Services Authority, committed to caring for you. The views and opinions expressed on Straight Talk with Austin and Ellio do not necessarily reflect or represent the views of Stingray Media, its staff, or contributors. Callers to the program accept full responsibility for the views expressed. The show host and affiliates are not liable for any statements made or any harm claimed. All callers to the program indemnify Straight Talk from all claims. Offensive, defamatory, or unlawful content will not be tolerated. Be a part of the conversation by calling 745-2626. Now, here's Straight Talk with Austin and Ellio on Bobo 103.1.
And welcome back, Cayman, to more Straight Talk here on Bobo 103.1 FM and simulcast live over YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. We're your host, Ellio Solomon, myself, Austin Harris. And the phone lines are open. 745-2626 is the number. As we await the government strategic policy statement, which should take several weeks to develop as the three various groupings of the coalition come together to sort of combine their various manifesto priorities into a single tangible document, we, of course, have decided to take on the review of the various manifestos, trying to identify certain synergies or similarities or parallels that may exist in those manifestos that might otherwise give us some guidance as to what those priorities may look like. In the last half hour, we took a look at food security, which is an area that both parties, or both groups rather, seem to support. And again, their approaches to developing it, whilst there are different ways of achieving the same result,
largely similar.
They are very, very similar. And we think perhaps it might be one of the areas that might formulate part of their strategic policy going forward by focusing, as we stated, on the things they can agree on and then moving on to the things that perhaps they may differ on last.
Just a quick text.
Yep.
There's an almost 200-acre farm next to the prison that I believe was closed down a few years ago. Mm-hmm. But Honduras, etc., provides business continuity. If a hurricane destroys the island, you have to eat pretty quick.
Yep.
So, yeah, I like the idea of what they're talking about there on the farming. Hopefully something will actually happen. They say promises comfort for fool, but I'm hopeful that this government will make it happen.
Yeah,
right?
Indeed.
I also wanted to say really quickly on, and forgive me if I take you off track, but I looked at housing very quickly. And one of the things that I note that was not on there when it talked about home ownership is I think one of the things that really needs to be addressed in this country is the whole issue about foreclosures.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've had just yesterday, I think it was, someone gave me a very sad story. And again, this is someone owning a very reasonable property. I think part of it was a rental property, et cetera, and losing it to the bank for $20,000.
Yeah.
And then you really have to ask yourself, come on, the guy owes $20,000, and this is not like you're saying this person, this guy owes $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. I need my money back. You're talking about $20,000.
Right.
They're really home. So when we talk about home ownership, I didn't see this in the manifesto, but when we talk about home ownership, I think that's part of it.
Yes.
Is making sure that you can actually hold on to it and that, persons are not necessarily going to be abused. And I do remember chatting with I think it was Mr. Griffith in the Law Revision Office, who was talking about the proposal for new legislation as it relates to foreclosures, et cetera. So I'm going to try to see if I can find that and see if that has just been something that's been proposed, it hasn't been approved, or what stage it's at, because the issue of foreclosures really has to be addressed as well.
Well, I'm glad you raised that, because this is one of the areas that I believe that we dropped the ball on in terms of opportunities in my administration, 2017 to 2021. The then Minister of Financial Services, the Honorable Tara Rivers, had in fact commissioned a report to look into the issue of foreclosures, the growing, trend in volumes, and the Caymanians impacted by that. Unfortunately, the findings of that report, I would just say, never made its way to caucus. It could have happened in cabinet, but it didn't make its way to caucus, and certainly didn't make its way in terms of actual reform. In the PPM-led coalition's defense, it was on the mind, and again, they've taken it further from just an idea to action, to actionable steps. But unfortunately, those steps ended at a report or a commissioning of a report, which is probably sitting on some shelf somewhere. Hopefully, the incoming administration will find it, dust it off, perhaps take a look at it, make some amendments to it to, meet the current times. But I agree with you. Yeah. It is absolutely a key area that is essential. And, whether our fears, our worst fears, in terms of the consequences of some of the decisions that we make actually come true or not, there is always the possibility, the looming possibility, that foreclosures could once again become a major issue. And for many, it already has been a major issue. It, combined with the lending policies of banks, are all, I think, inclusive in a significant conversation in that regard that would lead to some form of legislative reform. Again, the PPM had the opportunity. They didn't, close the circle on this. And again, I'm not blaming just them. I was a part of that, so certainly I take on responsibility for myself. But we did look at it, but we didn't obviously push it as a greater priority. And I agree with you. I think it's something that needs a priority look, and I would encourage the current administration to do so. Yeah, and I'll definitely be doing some checks to see where we're at with it, and we can ventilate that here on the program as well, educate, enlighten, and elevate everyone. But just hearing those sort of stories, I mean, this is something where, a person's worked hard all their life, they've been making payments, and it's like anything could happen, an illness, an accident, and to think that you'll be losing it for pennies, if you like. Yeah. This is not something that you're going to say, this is a major risk to this financial institution. How are we going to survive if this man doesn't pay this bill? Yeah. No. It's just a very, very sad scenario. Yeah, no, I agree with you. Can't be allowed to continue. Some of the excuses and some of the reasons why banks have foreclosed on persons, some may be reasonable, but in large percent, most were unreasonable. And didn't need to happen. Right. But certainly without a steady hand on the government being prepared to, sort of draw a line in the sand, so to speak, we continue to allow what many have called the Bankers Association, a.k.a. the banking cartel, to set the rules with very little government input. And again, we've seen this in previous discussions about, where and when you can cash a check. Do you have an account with the institution? The fees that banks have been attaching to just about every transaction. And, of course, the move to remove the human element from the retail banking side, encouraging everybody to go online. Mm-hmm. Again, yes, it's a way of the world. Why should Cayman be? Well, let's not worry about jobs, Austin. Well, let's not worry about jobs. No, exactly. Again, these are all areas that the government should be expected to get involved in. But, again, they have been reluctant to do so. Likewise, they have been reluctant to address the whole issue of development and the development lobby because, again, for one reason or the other, they represent positive revenues for the country. And oftentimes they don't want to upset the apple cart. And there's no reason to upset the apple cart, but there's sometimes, our products sometimes lose their luster and they need a little shine from time to time. And that is where government should, I believe, have an obligation to step in, but government is made up of people, and what we should do and what we do oftentimes differ rather significantly. Continuing our discussion in terms of some of the similarities between the CCP and CINP manifestos, we see that both groupings also agreed on the need for immigration reform. Again, as we stated at the beginning, obviously guided by the concerns raised by their respective constituents as part of their canvassing that was conducted. But both sides agreed that the immigration system needs to be revamped. It needs to be revamped to ensure that Caymanians are put first in jobs and career opportunities. They both agree that the existing immigration laws have been inadequately enforced as well as updated. They both agree that unplanned or unaddressed immigration has also led to the unplanned population expansion, as we talked about yesterday with the 60-40 split, largely 60% foreign nationals now compared to Caymanians, sitting at 40%, and the need to urgently address immigration from both a social and an economic standpoint, which are obviously some of the consequences attached to the whole matter of immigration reform. Both the CCP and the CINP seem to agree on the need to develop a national workforce development strategy, is what the TCCP call it, and the CINP call it the implementation of a national workforce development plan. So one is a strategy, one is a plan, but I think either way, they both seem to be on the same page with that. They both seem to also agree on the need for a human capital plan, which is what I think the CINP referred to things like the path towards Caymanian citizenship, and how Caymanians can have upward mobility and work in complement to our foreign counterparts, but very clearly having Caymanians at the top.
Are they giving a specific solution insofar as how you deal with this increase in numbers of persons becoming Caymanians?
Well, let's see. As far as the TCCP are concerned, let me just look back on their individual manifesto on immigration. The CINP did a much better job almost across the board in being specific on how they would achieve it. Well, let's see. Let's take them first. The CINP says on their manifesto, for too long, immigration laws, policies have not been adequately updated or enforced, resulting in unplanned population growth and inadequate opportunities for Caymanians. We must address these urgently to reduce the increasing social and economic issues impacting our community. We'll do so by first reviewing requirements and legislation for the road to Caymanian citizenship. That includes permanent residency as well as Caymanian status. So obviously taking a look at that application process.
Reviewing and what?
The what they call the road to Caymanian citizenship, which is the permanent residency and Cayman status routes.
I was wondering, what was the other word along with reviewing? Reviewing
the requirements and legislation for the roadmap to Caymanian citizenship that includes permanent residency as well as Caymanian status. Did you find the word you were looking for?
No, because I'm just hearing review, like review and modify and amend.
Well, it just says review requirements and legislation. So I'm presuming that
that's infer.
In that reviewing process, they will identify certain areas that simply need to change. They suggest introducing a higher level of accountability for organizations in relation to hiring and training of Caymanians. One of the ways is the introduction of more apprenticeship programs, which I think is a good idea. But I also think the accountability factor of organizations to conform to the existing laws, both in word as well as practice. Again, I've said it many times, we don't need to reinvent the wheel on this bad boy. We just simply need to enforce the law.
Enforcement is the issue.
And ensure that it is enforced. So, the previous administrations sought to approach this issue by focusing on the business staffing plan, for example. But it was a lot of hot air because previous business staffing plan boards have had a number of what I thought were excellent recommendations and guidance, but they seem to fall on deaf ears. Will this be a repeat of that again? Again, your guess is as good as mine. But enforcing the existing law is obviously a key to quick success, almost immediate success. And then, of course, perhaps you may want to update it to meet the current times. But really, again, I don't see much room for updating, but enforcing is definitely missing.
But enforcement is missing, and this is part of why, to me as a legislator, you have to come up with some creative things. Like, let me just give an example. So when we had the pension, when I came up with the pension amendment, you could have went off and done a typical government move and almost created another government department just to help to administer that. But that's going to be more bodies, more cost. So the creativity was to be able to do that in a way that the financial institutions were doing the work on your behalf, right? And the same thing when it comes to the jobs. When I came up with the jobs for KMINs only, well, you see, it's very simple. It would be, if you're going to hire a receptionist, for example, use that. Keep it simple so no one gets threatened. If you're going to be a receptionist, it's a job for KMINs only. I don't need officers doing too much work right there. And all I'm saying is enforcement is an issue, but enforcement costs more money. And we have seen that for how many decades now that doesn't seem to be working.
Mm-hmm.
So I hear you. Not you, but I hear them.
Yeah.
But we've been there. So, I mean, again, give them a blank sheet of paper. Hopefully it happens. But I think you really need to find a couple of different ways that you don't necessarily have to require to. Let me go back to something. The other day, we had the issue about the trash.
Yes.
Why is it that no one is doing anything about the trash? So a little bit of investigation, speak to an officer. He says, what? You know what that problem is? Nobody wants to do the paperwork. Okay, no, it's a reality. But if you turned around and made it a ticketable offense,
yes.
they would take action.
Right.
So help the officers too.
Yes.
You know, because why does the officer have to do a big write-up? I just saw him throw a piece of trash. Mm-hmm. Pull him over and give him a $100 ticket. So help the officer, okay? That's all I'm going to say. Now, I would like to say in the perfect world, yes, why aren't you writing it up?
Yep.
Got AI now. But in the meantime, let's help the officer make it a ticketable offense. And I think we have to do the same things when it comes to some of these jobs and everything else that we're talking about enforcement. So when I talk about jobs for KMINs only, how people call the program, not calling any names, some of my favorite friends, yeah, but Ellio, all jobs are for KMINs. I say, well, it doesn't seem to be working, does it?
Clearly not when you look at the 60-40 makeup.
No.
Just on the issue of trash, again, another drop ball opportunity, I thought, on the part of my former administration. They first proposed the notion of trash wardens, to your point, not only to address the employment situation, creating new job categories specifically for persons who would patrol like traffic police the areas and the roads less traveled looking for trash violators, and then being able to issue, to your point, tickets for fines as low as $25, perhaps as high as $150, and perhaps up to $500 for those persons who regularly and continually dump major trash along our highways and byways. I think of what I used to call the Prospect Bypass, or the east-west arterial heading into the eastern districts. Once you pass the Christy Tomlinson roundabout, on the left, there is a regular trash dumping site that was never intended to be, but you had one derelict car on site, then everybody says, oh, that must be where I dump my bathtub when I'm tired of it. But these were the opportunities that were visible to our administration. These were the recommendations put forward by our administration. But again, the ideas never left the page.
But let's talk about that. Why, during your administration, why did that happen?
Your guess is as good as mine. I mean, really, it was tangible. It was easy to achieve, is what we call low-hanging fruit.
Right.
But again, in the administration of government policies, sometimes, that which is obvious gets missed. And I don't know why it never happened.
Yeah, and this is it. I mean, I think it's almost like, I don't know where they get lost, but a lot of these things are, use your term, low-lying fruit, very simple, very easy to implement.
Yes.
Even with respect to the pension amendment, I remember, and again, Mr. Anglin helped us out with that. He was the minister responsible for pensions. But I'm Mr. Simamba that actually caused the program. He was a drafter at the time. This wasn't something super difficult.
No, it's not rocket science.
No, this is not rocket science.
Yep.
There's so many ways that you can help the people of this country. You just need to say, okay, you know what? Let's talk about trash, and let's just get on with it.
Yes.
Go ahead. In this particular case, the wardens, there's a possibility of saying, hey, you got a video camera, you video it, we'll find them, and you get a percentage. I don't know. Get on with it.
Mm-hmm. Because
it is low-lying fruit, and it really isn't that difficult.
Yes.
And I can tell you what, it shouldn't take 4 years.
No.
No,
it should not.
It's very, very sad, and it's, and I really hope that we're not just again on another 4-year cycle where we'll be just discussing the same issues again in 2029. But we'll see.
Yes, indeed. So again, sticking with immigration, some synergies between the TCCP and the Cayman Islands National Party as it relates to a workforce development plan, a human capital plan, a reform of the work permit system. Though I will admit, though, there was one or two aspects of the TCC plan that seemed to me counterproductive to their overall objectives. Whilst, again, on the one hand, they believe reform of the work permit system was necessary, when you take a look closer at what they called promoting a stronger and fairer work permit system, you see things like accelerating the decision-making process in relation to regular work permits, reforming the eligibility requirements for temporary work permits, making certain categories of work permits, more difficult to obtain. That's a bonus. And improving the administrative function of the work permit system, which, again, the administrative function and the decision-making function, I think, go hand in hand. If you improve the administrative process, then clearly you make the decision-making process more efficient. But this notion of accelerating the decision-making process, I don't know.
There's a lot of inequities, right? And to me, it's not that difficult to resolve. Let me show you. And you've also, served in HR as well.
Yes.
But you have a person coming in, they're coming from God knows where, Botswana. And, they come and they have a master's degree and blah, blah, blah. Who checks that? Who confirms that they have a master's degree from blah, blah, blah? In what institution? You only have to put the onus on them. You only have to put the onus on them to prove that this is a legitimate institution and, in fact, they have a degree. But they can just put it on their resume, and then the HR guy goes, oh, I guess he has a degree from whatever. If it's a Caymanian now, they're calling ICCI. You've seen this guy?
Yes, of course, exactly.
Hey, if it's a Caymanian, you go through all kinds of scrutiny. I've been watching that guy for 6 years. He never left the island.
Right.
But the guy coming in from God knows where just automatically gets accepted. And all of these things are disadvantaging Caymanians in their own country.
Yes.
And I really don't see why this requires any sort of genius or anybody to be flown in here from Canada with a tie on to give us some consulting on how we resolve that.
Right.
It's pretty straightforward.
Well, again, as we both agree, enforcement of existing laws and addressing some of the gaps really don't take a lot. They just take the will to implement them. I will, though, give the CCCP some credit. Because they're strong supporters of strengthening and expanding the enforcement function of work. So that may mean new hires. That may mean greater powers of enforcement, greater
Hopefully
powers
those are
of
Caymanians.
arrest. We hope those are Caymanians. But certainly, these all lend themselves to the wider issue of immigration reform. Both agree with greater opportunities for Caymanians in the hiring stages. Again, the CINP are a bit more specific in how that would happen, as it would mean as it deals through the creation of more apprenticeship programs. And I think these apprenticeship programs can happen both at the school leaver aspect, the student who's either in their junior or senior year getting ready to graduate. They start having these apprenticeship programs to those who perhaps will seek to go into the workforce versus going off to university.
Did it when I was in school?
But I know, me as well. But likewise, it could also happen for those persons seeking upward mobility, those who want to break that glass ceiling. So you got a supervisor or a manager who's on a work permit, but that work permit's going to expire in 4 or 5 years. So why not create an apprenticeship program if you haven't already identified it? This, by the way, was one of those recommendations from the business staffing plan years gone by that still hasn't materialized. Again, low-hanging fruit. Create an apprenticeship program by identifying Caymanians within that company that could meet that need. And then when that work permit expires, say goodbye and say hello to a Caymanian.
Well, I don't remember the exact provisions, for example, in the employment law off the top of my head, but I know one of them was in the 80s, 80s plus of discrimination. And again, officers being empowered to walk in and look and see where there's any form of employment discrimination. So you might have had a foreign national, for example, doing a job, they were making $120K, and now a Caymanian is doing the exact same job and making $80. These are all things that can be resolved. There's nothing that prevents these officers that I am aware of from going into business, sitting down and saying, bring me your files on that guy.
Yes.
oh, you have this position here, and why haven't you been treating a Caymanian? How could you possibly get a Caymanian and there's no one's been identified? These are things that they can be doing. So to your point earlier on the issue of enforcement is a big problem that we have in Cayman. I really want to just see someone to go ahead and see how we're going to resolve it.
Yes, no.
Something happened, and it's not that difficult.
Indeed. Well, it is 57 minutes past the hour of 5 o'clock, and we very shortly, in about, give or take 2 minutes, have to head off to the BBC News. But we are examining the manifestos at the moment, comparing the CCP to the CINP, trying to find similarities or parallels that might otherwise form part of the government's strategic policy statement going forward, by focusing first on the things that they seem to be in agreement on, and then leaving the issues that perhaps they are only partially in agreement on or may differ on outrightly for last. It certainly seems to be the most efficient way of doing it, and immigration reform seems to be a top priority for both of those teams. And again, they seem to have similarities on national workforce development, on human capital, on the need to revamp and reorganize what they call the roadmap to Caymanian citizenship. That includes the PR program, the Cayman Status program. Again, they both agree in terms of employment and upward mobility opportunities for hiring and training Caymanians. So again, these are areas that are likely to find themselves on the list of priorities for the new National Coalition for Caymanians, as they are now coined. The phone lines are open, 745-2626. Give us a call if you think you agree with our assertions and our review, or even if you think we're completely off base, we want to know why.
Or just want to talk about a boat out there or something.
Quite right. Well, keep it locked. There'll be more Straight Talk still to come, coming up next on Bobo FM.
Bobo.
The BBC is the world's most trusted news source.
And Bobo 103.1 is where you'll find the BBC World Service.
BBC News, the world news from the BBC.
And the home of Cayman's most listened to talk shows.
That's right, folks. Everyone is telling their mama about the cold hard truth.
And welcome to Straight Talk. I'm your host, Austin Harris.
And I'm Ellio Solomon.
Across Cayman.
On FM, online, and on your smart speaker. This is Bobo 103.1.
Welcome to our newsroom here in central London. We place ourselves here at a little desk right in the thick of things.
OS from the BBC.
We can catch the very latest news from our colleagues, not just in this enormous room, but also from our colleagues around the world.
I'm in the room where they're treating children.
This is a combat zone.
The situation after the typhoon is very complicated.
It was a very tense situation.
OS from the BBC.
The home of the BBC World Service. This is Bobo FM.
BBC News.
BBC News.
World news from the BBC.
Violent clashes.
Thick black smoke.
A tremendous legal victory.
Crucial elections.
Destructive winds.
A search and recovery operation.
A race against time.
An imminent threat. Flying a drone over a rival team's training session.
Whatever is happening, wherever it's happening, catch up with the latest news bulletins from the BBC.
The home of the BBC World Service. This is Bobo FM. This is Bobo 103.1, powered by Health Services Authority.
At Health Services Authority, they are committed to caring for you. They are Cayman's largest and longest standing healthcare provider, offering the most comprehensive range of inpatient, outpatient, and public health services at 9 different locations across all 3 islands.
Across Cayman on 103.1 FM, online, and on your smart speaker. The home of the BBC World Service. This is Bobo 103.1.
For the news. BBC News with Sue Montgomery. Thick black smoke has risen from the Sistine Chapel chimney, signalling that the cardinals meeting in the conclave have not yet agreed on a new pope. Thousands of people gathered in St. Peter's Square to wait for the result of the first vote, which lasted about 3 hours. Alim Makboul reports.
Black smoke. In the traditional, dramatic way, the world was told no pope had yet been chosen. The day ended with ritual, and it certainly started that way. With cardinals arriving at St. Peter's Basilica to take up their place in this moment of history. The next we'll see one of the men inside, they'll be Pope. But not this evening. There may have been disappointment, though probably not surprise at the inconclusive vote, but there will be now up to 4 ballots a day until a new Pope is chosen.
Russian state media say a 3-day unilateral ceasefire proposed by Moscow in its war in Ukraine has come into force. Ukraine has scorned the truce, but President Zelensky repeated on Wednesday night that Kiev was ready to observe a longer 30-day ceasefire. He said it was absolutely fair that Russian skies were currently, in his words, not calm. The Kremlin says it's taking measures to ensure the safety of foreign leaders now arriving in Moscow for its World War II commemorations. The US Central Bank has left interest rates unchanged for the 3rd time in a row, despite pressure from President Donald Trump to lower borrowing costs. The US Federal Reserve has warned that inflation and unemployment could rise because of Washington's tariffs on foreign imports. Mr. Trump has criticised the head of the central bank, saying Jerome Powell should bring down interest rates. But Mr. Powell said there was ongoing uncertainty about tariffs, and the Fed would announce a cut only when it thought the time was right.
We are comfortable with our policy stance. We think we're in the right place to wait and see how things evolve. We don't feel like we need to be in a hurry. We feel like it's appropriate to be patient. And when things develop, of course, we have a record of we can move quickly when that's appropriate.
The central bank's decision affects borrowing costs for people and businesses. Pakistan's Prime Minister has said the country's military had made its reply following last night's Indian missile strikes on targets in Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Speaking during an address to the nation, Shehbaz Sharif referred to Pakistan's earlier claim that it had shot down 5 Indian fighter jets and said Delhi had misjudged Pakistan's determination to fight back. India has not confirmed the reports. BBC News. The BBC understands that 4 Iranian men who were arrested on Saturday in a series of police raids across England had allegedly been plotting an attack in the Israeli embassy in London. The men are still being questioned after being arrested on suspicion of preparing a terrorist act. Police have not officially revealed what the suspected target was, but the BBC has been told a newspaper report naming the Israeli embassy is accurate. A US federal judge has found that the Trump administration cannot deport migrants to Libya unless they have a meaningful chance to challenge their removal in court. It had earlier emerged that the government plans to send immigrants, said to include Mexicans, Vietnamese and Filipinos, to Libya. A jury in the United States has cleared 3 former police officers of second-degree murder and other charges relating to the death of young black man Tyree Nichols in 2023. There was national outrage after body cam footage showed the officers, who are all black, beating the 29-year-old during a traffic stop in the city of Memphis. He died 3 days later from his injuries. Speaking on behalf of the prosecution team, the Memphis District Attorney, Steve Mulroy, said they were unhappy with the verdict.
We are obviously disappointed by today's verdict. We respect the jury's decision, but we obviously strongly disagree with it. We, in good faith, brought this case, and I am convinced to this day that we had compelling evidence that showed that there was proof for every element of every one of the offenses that we charged.
Football and the French side, Paris Saint-Germain, are through to the UEFA Champions League final after beating Arsenal 3-1 on aggregate, with Wednesday night semi-final in Paris ending 2-1. PSG will take on the Italian team.
Opinions expressed on Straight Talk with Austin and Ellio do not necessarily reflect or represent the views of Stingray Media, its staff, or contributors. Callers to the program accept full responsibility for the views expressed. The show host and affiliates are not liable for any statements made or any harm claimed. All callers to the program indemnify Straight Talk from all claims. Offensive, defamatory, or unlawful content will not be tolerated. Be a part of the conversation by calling 745-2626. Now, here's Straight Talk with Austin and Ellio on Bobo 103.1.
And welcome back, K-Man, to more Straight Talk here on Bobo 103.1 FM. We're your hosts, Ellio Solomon, myself, Austin Harris, time in studios now 7 minutes past the hour of 6 o'clock as we move into our final half hour for today's program as we continue our conversation, largely just between you and I, on perhaps our examination of the existing manifestos of those groups that make up the National Coalition for the Cayman Islands. We have started with, of course, the two largest groups, the CCP and the CINP, but we also hope to acquire manifestos for the four independents who we haven't been able to get a hold of. If you are in the listening audience and you have copies of these manifestos, but you like what you're hearing,
share it with a friend.
Share it with a friend. Share it with us in particular as your friend, and we will happily engage a similar review of those manifestos with the view of seeking to perhaps identify what the strategic policy statement of the National Coalition for Caymanians may look like in the coming weeks ahead when they present this document and this plan in the House of Parliament. The phone lines are open. 745-2626 is the traditional phone line number, or you can utilize our WhatsApp number, 928-2562, and from there you can either send us a WhatsApp audio note or
I got a comment.
WhatsApp text
I got a
message.
comment and a question.
Okay, fire away.
So my comment, first of all, and you saying it's just you and I talking. You and I talking, but lots of people listening.
Glad
Now,
to hear that.
one of the things you have to note is if you're saying something, people already know they can make noise because I already know what you're going to say.
Right.
And I know what you're saying. But a brain that's being filled up, people normally have their mouth shut. And I think that we're putting something in there. So I wanted to ask you because, the issue about immigration reform, et cetera, I think during the election they raised the issue about civil service. Which and what did their manifesto say on that?
Well, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked it. A lot was said about drawing the civil service into sort of similar parallels with the private sector. Though arguably looking at their manifestos, I was really only able to find one tangible point, or i.e. guidance point, on this otherwise position. Starting with the CINP, they suggested amending legislation to ensure government is held to the same requirements as private sector employers. This will prevent a large number of people being able to develop rights to remain in the Cayman Islands forever without any formal independent vetting. And of course, this train of thought matches almost identically, albeit the CCP managed to say it in less than a sentence, what the CINP took maybe 3 or 4. But the CCP said implementing a required rollover system in the civil service with eligible persons being grandfathered in. So likewise, to limit the length of time persons can remain and therefore increasing the eligibility for either PR or Cayman status.
Governments always seem to be operating in a bubble. Certain rules, most rules don't apply to them.
Well, what they do and what we have seen, the trend is those persons nearing the rollover period in the private sector oftentimes will leave the private sector, get a job within government where there is no rollover policy.
Let's continue.
And they continue ad infinitum until such period that they do attain the number of years. And of course, government's a good paymaster. So then they start to achieve the, number of investment properties, a home, money in the bank, blah, blah, blah. They're charitable individuals, et cetera, which only increase their likability and, ability to gain access on, again, what the CINP call the roadmap to Caymanian citizenship.
Well, I'll just for those government members that are listening, throw out that on the PR side, try making it that one passport.
Yes.
Let's see if you're willing to renounce your citizenship somewhere else. Let's see how bad you want to live here.
If you want to be naturalized as a Caymanian, then you should only be carrying one passport. And to my colleague's point, will you renounce one in order to obtain the other? That shows real commitment.
That'll stop.
I tell you what.
3 o'clock.
It's
PR reduction immediately.
What? Overnight? 50% reduction. We can't explain it, but we're just grateful it happened.
Yep.
With 17 minutes remaining, and again, we focused on food security, then we focused on immigration reform, 2 areas that there were clear similarities and synergies between the two parties. Now, the third big issue, cost of living, major issue amongst voters. Both groups identified this as a priority, but their approaches to getting there differ greatly. However, I think even though they have different approaches, I think they have some very good ideas, if I'm honest, on both sides of the coin to address the whole cost of living initiative.
Might need to be combined then.
That should certainly be combined, without a doubt. So let's just take it at face value, starting with the CCP.
Right.
The stated goals for reducing cost of living include lowering electricity bills by facilitating government, off-reg, and CUC working together to prioritize the phased implementation of transitional fuels as outlined in the National Energy Policy. Obviously moving away from, for example, diesel fuel and going on to
LNG?
What is it called again? LNG. Yes. And then, of course, the renewable options of solar and geothermal. Again, I think this is a great idea because all three groups have their ideas in terms of how this should happen. All three groups, I think, have a clear understanding of the options. But what is missing is that arbitrator. Someone to sit in the middle and say, listen, let's bring these ideas and these groups together. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about, the benefits, the cost-effective benefits of introducing these transitional fuels. And let's establish a clearly and identifiable timetable into which these are introduced into the country's electricity infrastructure.
Well, I hate to throw a wrench in it.
Okay, throw a wrench in it.
But I think I'm going to throw a wrench in it because we were informed, unfortunately, and no fault of this government necessarily, although it does exist with a couple of members, that we kind of missed the opportunity, that 5-year, what do you call it, a 5-year window, where you notify CUC that we want to negotiate the contract.
Oh, yes.
That is going to have a major impact on that, I think.
Huge lost opportunity. And again, this is where I hope and I pray that this tripartite government will manage some stability and discipline amongst their ranks. Because the last administration, to your point, had an opportunity. Certainly the contract for CUC came due. It was an opportunity for government to renegotiate, to fine-tune, to make amendments.
Yep.
But frankly, the last administration were too busy arguing about who should be in charge and who should wear the crown than they were to see the issues and opportunities, perhaps in the tall grass, to actually address it. And again, that comes down to lack of discipline on the part of those members. I'm hoping that will be different this time around, though, again, I have my concerns. I mean, you've got, like I said at the beginning, I think I told the Compass this, in the last election, there were far too many alphas in the 3, if not 4 groups that were running in this election, the PPM, the CINP, the CCP, and even the independents. A lot of alphas, a lot of persons, certainly with the viewpoint that they are the ones capable of running the country. They are the ones capable of leading the country. And I wondered whether they had the ability to compromise. Again, we saw the first glimmer of hope that compromise is possible by the formation of the National Coalition for Caymanians. How quickly that happened. And as we stated earlier on today, maybe that happened because these discussions started taking place before the elections were over, which is a good thing. But that shows discipline. That shows professionalism. That's a feather in their bonnet. But let's face it, Andre Ebanks, a powerful personality. Dan Scott didn't get elected, but he has said in the media that he's going to stay the chairman of the CNP and still be an influence in terms of ensuring their priorities take place. And on the independent side, he got Ralston Anglin. 3 very dominant personalities. They work well together when their interests are aligned. But what happens when their interests aren't aligned? With who will take priority and who will win, quote unquote, that particular discussion? We've seen, at least in the case of Andre Ebanks, certainly how they address challenges to leadership. Hopefully they learned something from the last administration, now being in the main seat as premier, the driver's seat, so to speak. Again, patience and understanding. and greater discipline will feature prominently as opposed to the last administration. But it all comes down to, majority support as well.
I have a question for you because my government wasn't a coalition government. It was full party.
Yeah.
How did you all resolve your coalition issues? I mean, did you just go caucus and vote?
Yes.
That's it?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm glad you asked that question. Now, again, to the earlier point, my coalition was largely different than this one because it was largely PPM majority.
Well,
they were already a committed team. So the independents, myself...
So you probably had a meeting before the meeting.
Yeah, well, we had a meeting before the meeting. But I will say this, because there were persons that used to say that Sir Alden was an authoritarian type of leadership. It's his way or the highway type of nonsense. I didn't find that at all in my 4 years, particularly as a caucus member. He allowed, and to his credit, he put every issue on the table, whether they were the issues of us two independents or the issues of his PPM. They were all on the table. My opinion mattered just as much as, Dwayne Seymour's opinion. Sometimes we actually won favor with the group, I think largely based on our ability to present our cases clearly. And person go, oh, you have a point. Let's go that route and see how it works. So there was a much better working relationship. But this whole notion that, Sir Alden and the PPM or whatnot were my way and their way only. Yes, they were. They did make up the majority. Yes, their priorities did feature more prominently. But at the decision-making table, which is caucus, I think Sir Alden stated something that I'll never forget. He says, you as backbenchers are called on to support the actions of the front bench and cabinet. But if you don't know what cabinet is discussing, how can you support it? Right. So all issues that went before cabinet came before caucus first, for caucus's understanding and then approval, and then off it went. Didn't have to go that way, but it went that way, and I appreciated that because I thought it was an efficient way in which to run a government. So to answer your question, our dynamic was, I think, more easy to work with than the current dynamic where you see, again, three different groupings.
Do you remember what the composition was? How many PPM and how many independents? Eludes you.
It eludes me. I mean, I know there was myself. I know there was Dwayne Seymour. I'd have to, I guess I'd have to go back and look.
Well, either way, it sounded like it worked largely.
It did. I really thought it did. I thought Sir Alden was an excellent leader. Again, something that the last administration didn't enjoy. He certainly enjoyed the support of the majority of caucus, whereas, the last administration, again, it was, a night of the short knives or the long knives, depending on, which administration it went through. There wasn't any of that. There was no infighting so much, so to speak. All I can say is certainly as we got further down to the elections, the differences in what color flags we flew started to really define themselves. You're either with us or you're against us type of notion. And it may work all well and good when we are now the government, we all took the same oath, etc. But as we get down to election time, as we stated, election is war.
The musical chair begins.
The musical chairs begin.
Because I might not be happy with how things were, my chances of getting reelected.
Right.
I jumped the aisle and become an independent or something.
Campaigning is war, and, whatever teamwork, whatever alliances, whatever arrangements, AKA I thought we had, clearly that was not the case at election time. But again, it was a learning experience. I enjoyed my 4 years. I have no regrets. I look back on it. I thought, I didn't achieve everything I wanted to achieve. We as a government, as we've pointed out here today in the low-hanging fruit, didn't achieve a lot of the things it had certainly talked about. But it was a terrific opportunity. It was a terrific experience. I'll never regret representing this country. And one of the best jobs I've ever had was that one, most meaningful jobs, I would say to you. I really enjoyed the work.
Well, I'm sure you did an excellent job despite any criticism I'm sure you'll get, but that's part,
and as did you. I mean, let's face it. I mean, one of the things I admire about you was, 13 different, government motions, 13 different foundational recommendations that you debated on the floor of Parliament or, the Legislative Assembly at the time. I think, people dismiss that as, well, what do you expect? But it's not easy. and to move those motions, to bring those motions, to debate those motions. Again, the jobs for Caymanians, for example, the pension reform, not all those ideas certainly won favor and were implemented, but arguably, as we discussed today, they're still relevant.
Yeah.
And maybe it might just take somebody else to say, you know what, let's pick up on somebody else's good idea and run with it. You know, traffic, for example, was something I thought we had an opportunity to solve and fix, particularly, during the COVID era. But again, COVID happened and that changed priorities entirely. So we lost, better take a year and a half or 18 months.
But I thank you.
But again, no regrets.
Yeah, we digressed. The digression was good. It was educational, and I thank you for that, Austin, for sharing that. I think that that's a coalition experience that in this particular room only you can share. I appreciate that. Now we don't have much time now, 6:22, but we can at least touch on cost of living and resume tomorrow.
Yes, well, yeah, is right. 6 minutes, give or take, remaining. Cost of living, both agreed it was necessary, but their approaches were different. Let's see if I can quickly go through them for the benefit of the listening audience. Starting first with the CCP. The stated goals include lowering electricity bills. We talked about that by the phased implementation of transitional fuels. In accordance with the national energy policy, expanding programs and regulations to make homes more energy efficient, incorporate rooftop solar where possible. Certainly, I encourage that. And again, meets our previous guest's viewpoint as well, Mr. Kerry Lawrence. Developing community-scale rooftop solar solutions. Again, a viable idea. Government doesn't have to build anything. We just use the existing infrastructure and put solar panels on it and find a way to connect that into the electricity grid. Again, low-hanging fruit, not necessarily the easiest to implement. That does require some science in all of that, and certainly an expense cost, which can be spread to both the utility provider and the government provider, and perhaps even a PPP in there somewhere if we find those costs to be prohibitive. But it is an opportunity that we don't have to develop from scratch, which I think is a good idea. Reviewing the fuel duty calculation method and consider charging duty by invoice cost and not volume. Now, I think that idea alone is something that is worth exploring further. And that is, again, reviewing the fuel duty calculation method and consider charging duty based on invoice cost rather than volume. Which, of course, again, the fuel suppliers argue, well, the reason you can't access the same pricing features as, for example, you see on continental U.S. is that they're buying, 10 times the volume that you are in the Cayman Islands, and therefore those pricing is supply and demand. I think this notion has legs, has potential, and is certainly worth exploring and developing. Now, those were the CCP's recommendations to address in a nutshell. They go on much further, but we don't have the time to get into it. The CINP, on the other hand, sought to address cost of living through what they called meaningful wages for all Caymanians. They go on to say, when considering sustainable wage growth for Caymanians, the country faces significant economic challenges due to its high dependence on foreign labor, with foreign workers comprising over 50% of the total workforce and over 60% of minimum wage earners. A traditional minimum wage increase would not be practical, as this would likely result in inflationary pressures. To achieve this as an alternative, they propose implementing what they call an opportunity wage format, or a sector-specific wage framework, instead of increasing the one-size-fit-all minimum wage, they would certainly look at this on a sector-by-sector breakdown and see whether or not the wages being afforded to employees in those sectors could be improved. They go on to say sector-based wage floors that increase with skill levels and productivity, targeted at low-skilled and skilled industries, sectors, and jobs that have a high percentage of low-wage foreign labor, ensuring wage increases align with economic growth, and requiring businesses to provide upskilling opportunities for Caymanian workers, linking wages to worker qualifications and industry standards. They also suggest what they call productivity-based wage growth by encouraging businesses to increase wages based on productivity gains and not just cost of living adjustments, offering tax incentives and grants to companies, investing in worker training and process automation, introducing a national skills certification program where wage levels correspond to worker qualifications. So the CNP viewpoint is increased wages, and therefore cost of living will come down because obviously there's more money in people's pockets. The CCP approach is reduce costs by tackling some of the big scale items with electricity topping the scales next to mortgage costs as two primary expenses, if you will, that it contribute to the cost of living. And of course, they all both agree on food security and bringing those prices down, which really, again, encompasses it.
There was one on insurance too, right?
Yes, this was a CCP recommendation to bring down the cost of insurance, the cost of property insurance, and a few other things, which again, with a minute left, we just don't have the time to get into. But
it makes it sweet for to be continued.
To be continued. So again, tomorrow we will continue this discussion by examining the manifestos, looking for synergies and similarities in what could form the government's strategic policy statement in the weeks to come. We will be seeking to acquire the manifestos from the 4 independent candidates. But if you know an independent candidate, if you have an independent candidate manifesto, by all means, share it with us. You can send us a voice note or a WhatsApp text message to 928-2562, and we'll happily make arrangements to collect those from you. But at 28 minutes past the hour of 6 o'clock, we're your hosts, Austin Harris.
And I'm Ellio Solomon, and we'll see you here tomorrow, right here on Straight Talk.
Indeed, and reminding you to join Straight Talk every weekday from 4:30 to 6:30, Monday through Friday. And again, today is Wednesday, so tomorrow's Thursday. Short week.
I remind myself.
But we'll definitely get there. See you tomorrow right here for more Straight Talk on Bobo FM.
The home of the BBC World Service, the most trusted news source in the world. This is Bobo